Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to continue our lecture series on World War One, and very specifically over the next one, two, three lectures, we're going to actually wrap up World War One. Today we're going to discuss the Spanish flu and its impact on the world, but also on the war, and kind of the beginning of the end of the war with the Battle of Argonne. So, first thing that we got to understand is, that there are conditions outside of the war that are going to speed up the end of World War One, and kind of the biggest outside influence is going to be the Spanish flu. No, the Spanish flu is kind of misnamed. It doesn't, it's not that, nobody really knows where it started for sure. It gets called the Spanish flu because Spain got impacted, just absolutely devastating. It's one of the first nations to get impacted in a devastating kind of way. But it came out of nowhere. This flu comes out of nowhere, and it's going to be absolutely devastating. Around 30 million people are going to lose their lives worldwide, and it hits in like 1918, so kind of towards the end of the war here, and it's just going to decimate. Soldiers and civilian populations alike. It's going to ravish the world for about a year, and then at the end of the year, it's going to essentially kind of go away. And it's not because we come up with any kind of cure or vaccine. It just runs its course, and just is going to spread until it essentially dies out on its own. Doctors don't really know how to treat it, except to essentially tell people to stay clean and quarantine. There's not much for doctors to be able to do. About 500,000 Americans are going to get killed from the Spanish flu, and America really has it better than a lot of other nations. We're because we're so spread out that will help stop the spread and transmission of the disease. Europe's going to get racked really hard because just how close together they all are in Europe. And think about, that's true under normal circumstances. But during a war, when soldiers are in trenches, that's just rife for the spread of disease. And so, as hard as America gets hit, Europe's going to get harder. And in particular, Germany is going to get hit the hardest. And so, Germany, who for the longest time during this war is fighting a true front war, now since Russia's out, they're focusing their attention on the Western front. They're wearing out. They're running out of, young men to be able to both fight and work in industry. And when the Spanish flu hits, they're going to lose even more fighting age men and working age men and women. And so, because this is a war of attrition, right? The first side to run out of stuff loses. This is going to be very impactful in Germany's ability to fight this war. We see in America that 40% of the Navy and 36% of the Army is going to get infected with the disease. And so those numbers are higher for Germany. And like I said, about 30 million people worldwide are going to be killed. Nobody really knows where it came from. Nobody really understands, exactly the origins here. But it's one of those things that's going to happen. It's a international tragedy. Not necessarily anybody's fault, but it is going to speed up the conclusion of the war because it's just going to wear out, everybody who's fighting and limit their war making capacity. Now, we're going to see in the United States that we're going to have all kinds of public policy measures to try and limit the spread. We're going to see public buildings being closed. There's going to be curfews out in the streets. They're going to shut down businesses that are going to require social distancing. I think something that in 2020 we understand. People could be fined for sneezing or spitting in the street without, wearing masks. The people are going to wear masks, be required to wear masks. And in the United States, it's we because of federalism, right? We've got state governments and national governments. Every different area kind of has different policies to regulate it. So it's not that every area you have to wear a mask. It's not that every area there's a curfew, but for most places, they're going to have those measures put in place, and people are going to be limited with where they can go and what they can do until we can get through this. And so, in 2020, we recognize, kind of what that's like because of COVID-19. Spanish flu is way more deadly. And so the fear that we have now because of COVID-19, that's it's a scary thing for sure. Spanish flu is going to be much worse. We're not going to. This is more deadly than the plague. The Spanish flu is, and so it's scary. We're going to have so many people die that a lot of cities run out of coffins. I mean, it's that it's kind of that massive. So what we see is, local high school gyms are going to be turned into, makeshift treatment centers. It's going to be kind of a scary thing. Hospital beds are at a premium, just like today in 2020 with COVID. That it's part of the reason why we social distance is not to overwhelm hospitals, because during the Spanish flu we learned a lesson that once we overwhelm the hospitals, then all of a sudden we got to cram everybody into high school gyms, and that's going to be a recipe for spreading disease, and so it becomes a real issue. The police will enforce curfews and make sure that people are staying at home and self-isolating. Police, you can see here, are wearing masks in public. Just like today, go outside today, and most people are wearing masks. But just like today, mask wearing is controversial for parts of the country who believe that the government doesn't have the right to enforce mask wearing. It's part of being in a democracy. We have a diversity of opinion, and that was the same in 1918 with the Spanish flu. You can see this guy above me right here. He is being refused public transportation because he's refusing to wear a mask. There was an anti-mask league in 1918. Just a group of citizens that just thought that it was overreaching for the government to impede their civil liberties for stopping the spread of the flu. We're seeing something similar happen today. When you're in a democracy, this is just a part of what a democracy is. People will have diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, and I wear a mask every time I go out, but some people disagree, and that's we can see is pretty consistent, and is always going to happen if in a society where we allow people to be free. And so you might disagree or you might agree, and that's just kind of what it is, and it's always it's always been that way. Now, because most people wore masks and most people social distance, that helps stop the spread. We know that now that does, and so we can see a lot of similarities between the 1918 Spanish flu and today, 2020 and COVID-19. Now, we need to talk about Spanish flu because of its impact on the war effort. America, with, it's tragic that 500,000 people in America died. It's absolutely tragic, but, our population is large, it's relatively spread out. And so our economy is going to survive this, I'm not going to say without any negative repercussions, because that's not entirely true. But our economy is going to survive relatively unscathed, and it's going to come out gangbusters at the end of this thing, and which means our war production remains high, and so the Allies, the British and the French, that are being devastated much worse than what America is feeling. They're not going to run out of supplies. They're not going to run out of food because American production stays high. German production, on the other hand, because they don't have the help, they're just kind of on their own. German production is going to go down. So they're not only losing men They're also fighting age men. They're also losing industrial capacity, and so they're not able to produce as much war material to keep fighting. And so the it wasn't looking good at this point. Once America joined the war, it wasn't looking good for Germany, uh, anyway, because America is fresh and brings millions of more troops that they're going to have to fight, and so the writing was kind of on the wall before the Spanish flu hit. Once the Spanish flu actually did hit, military leaders within Germany start to recognize that this is not going to be winnable for them. Now, the average German doesn't know that. The average German doesn't know that because the propaganda, the German government, to try and keep war morale high, is saying that they're winning, that any day now it's going to be over. And Germans are going to believe that very specifically because no fighting has been done on German soil. All the fighting has been done in France and Belgium and Russia. And so, of course, they think they're winning. And so it's going to come as a shock when things don't turn out that way, which is going to lead to conspiracy theories about betrayal, which Hitler later is going to take advantage of and essentially blame it on Jews, which is clearly ridiculous. So American troops at this time have essentially been playing a token role in the fighting, until around the end of 1917. And so, and that's again because General Pershing, we talked about this in previous lectures, wants to train American troops for trench warfare. He doesn't want to just unleash them on the Germans and get massacred. So, we are essentially training in Europe and then backing up the French and the British. But that'll start to change. And so by September of 1918, Americans are starting to take a larger role in the actual fighting, and the German generals realize that this is bad news, and they start to advocate to the Kaiser, to the leader of the German people, the German government, that it's time to talk about signing some sort of peace treaty. And so the German generals are saying they need to do this now because they're in possession of French territory, and if they negotiate for peace now, while they hold French territory, they're in a position of power, and so they don't have to worry about a treaty that's going to hurt Germany, and they might actually get to walk out of this thing keeping Alsace and Lorraine, keeping parts of Poland that they got from Russia, and so they want to negotiate from a position of power. And what they're telling the Kaiser is, if we try and talk peace now, we're probably going to get a treaty that's going to be good for Germany, right? Or, it's certainly not bad for Germany. But if we keep fighting, eventually we're going to lose. And once we lose, then we're going to be negotiating from a position of weakness. And so that means that that the Allies can essentially do whatever they want to Germany, and Germany just has to take it. So the German generals say, let's negotiate now, when we can say, hey, we'll give back parts of the land of France that we took, but we're going to keep these other parts. They've got bargaining chips. And so they're telling the Kaiser, let's do this now. But the Kaiser is going to essentially reject that. And the Kaiser is going to say, no, we're going to keep fighting. He's afraid that if he tries to talk peace now, that his government will be toppled by the German people. And he's not willing to accept that. So he says, keep fighting, which the German generals, particularly the Navy, are going to have a Allies, on the other hand, are going to accept Woodrow Wilson's peace plan, which is referred to as the 14 points. We'll talk about the 14 points in detail in a future lecture. Just understand now that the 14 points is essentially Wilson's idea for peace and prosperity in the future for Europe. And so it's, no more imperialism. It's not treating Germany harsh, not dismantling the German government, and it's essentially it's a really fair treaty designed to make sure that the kind of animosities and things that caused World War I don't happen again in the future. The Allies will agree to that. So the British and the French will agree to it. They'll make kind of one exception that they want Germany to pay for reparations for the war, but they're at least agreeing to Wilson's plans. Now, they're only doing that. They have no intention to really follow Wilson's 14 points. They're only doing that because they know they have to keep America happy, because if we stop fighting, they could potentially lose this war. So they're telling Wilson, sure, we'll do whatever you want. Just keep fighting. And then when the war's over, they don't have any intentions of actually following through with that. They want to hurt Germany. And unfortunately, Great Britain and France will be allowed to do that with the Treaty of Versailles, which is terrible for the future of humanity, because the treaty that they're going to get is going to be so punishing to Germany that it's going to cause massive resentment, and it's going to lead the German people to believe the only way that they can survive is if they have strong leadership, and so that will turn them essentially to Hitler. And so the Treaty of Versailles that's so punitive will, directly lead to the rise of Hitler in Germany. And so, Wilson kind of foresaw that and is going to try and, get the Allies to agree not to be punitive to Germany, and they will promise to do that. But once the war is over and they don't need America's help anymore, they're going to reject Wilson and his plans and punish Germany anyway. So that leads us, the fighting's not over. They're still fighting, and that leads us to the Battle of Argonne. This is going to be, kind of the biggest offensive that the Americans are going to be in charge of. There's been, lots of battles that Americans have taken part in, but this one is going to be the biggest and one of the most decisive. 1 million American and French soldiers are going to take part in this. It's going to be General Pershing and the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. Those are the American forces in Europe that are going to be doing the toughest part of the fighting. And over the course of the battle, we're going to be able to recover more than 200 square miles of French territory from the German army. I mean, this is a huge, huge victory. I mean, previous battles, hundreds of thousands of people died to, gain 100 yards. This battle is going to result with 200 square miles of French territory being taken back. And so this is going to again increase the demands that the German military are making on the Kaiser to sue for peace. Kaiser's still going to hold out. He's still going to hold out. We're still going to see a couple months of fighting here, even though Germany's just absolutely exhausted. They've been fighting too long. They've had too many soldiers die because of the battles. The Spanish flu has wrecked their economy, their production. Their domestic population, they're really hurting. And so, they're going to hold on for about another month before, eventually the Germans are going to give up. Now, they're going to give up before they actually get to German territory. So they still, the fighting is still being done in France and Belgium. So what happens next is going to again lead to a lot of conspiracy theories. The German Navy is going to mutiny. They're essentially going to say, look, we told the Kaiser we can't keep fighting, that this is bad for Germany. And so they're going to refuse to follow orders, and they're going to essentially force the Kaiser to abdicate, to give up his position as the leader of Germany. They're going to declare a republic and put together an interim government. That government will eventually be called the Weimar. Now, these are unelected people, right? And so this is, at this point, they're unelected. Eventually, they'll have elections. And it's going to be this group of essentially unelected people that have mutinied against the Kaiser that are going to sue for peace. And so they're going to go to the Allies and they're going to say, we're done fighting. And they're going to make a gigantic mistake here. a gigantic mistake for Germany and a gigantic mistake for humanity, because they're going to, allow the conditions for the very harsh Treaty of Versailles, which will, essentially put Hitler into power later. So what's that mistake? Well, on November 11th, at 11:11, they're going to declare an armistice, which is essentially a cessation of fighting. They're going to say, all right, no more fighting. And they're going to agree to, and this is the mistake that they make, they're going to agree to evacuate occupied territories, pull back behind the Rhine River, which is deep into German territory, and surrender all war materials. They're doing that before they agree to the terms of a formal peace treaty. And so, because they're surrendering war materials and backing off of occupied territory, they have no bargaining power anymore, right? The British and French militaries, they're going to keep their guns. They're going to occupy the territory that Germany had once held, and then they're going to talk about the conditions for peace. And so, by completely disarming and surrendering all the territory they've gained, that essentially means the British and French can do whatever they want to Germany, and Germany's defenseless to stop it from happening. This is what's going to allow the Treaty of Versailles to be just absolutely crushing to the German people. It's going to it's going to destroy their economy to the point their money becomes worthless, and their economy becomes a barter and trade economy. That's like Stone Age level economy, and it's going to make people desperate. And when people become desperate, they turn to whoever they believe is strong enough to get them out of the terrible living conditions that they're in. And they're going to decide that guy's going to be Hitler. And so because they lay down their arms, they're going to be punished just crazily, and because of that, they're going to turn to a strong dictator and actually elect him, and then we get World War II and the Holocaust. And so it's absolutely just this whole time period just fraught with mistakes. And so then it's going to lead to conspiracy theories that Hitler's going to take advantage of. The average German really believes that they're winning this war, and then all of a sudden the Navy just mutinies and they're told that they've lost. Well, they're not going to believe that. They're going to believe that they were betrayed, and it's going to allow people like Adolf Hitler to claim that no, you were winning, and you are the greatest economy in Europe, and you have the best military in Europe, and the only reason, which both of those things are true, by the way, and the only reason you lost is because the Jews betrayed you. Now, that's clearly not true, but people will believe it because of how just quickly they went from being the winners of World War I to the losers of World War I, and how hard they're punished for it. And so we'll talk about the terms of the Treaty of Versailles and why it's so punitive in a future lecture. But it is, believe me, it is a very bad treaty. And not just for Germany, but for everybody, because it's going to lead to the rise of Hitler. We've kind of learned that lesson that you don't want to punish people too hard, because it backs them into a corner, and when you back people in a corner, they get desperate, and when people get desperate, they get violent. And so we've kind of learned that lesson. So anyway, by November of 1818, the war is essentially over, and it's been devastating. We're going to have about 114,000 Americans have lost their lives. That's really very small. It's tragic, but very small compared to total dead. As far as total dead go, we see about 22 million total deaths. That's just an estimate. Some people estimate higher, some a little bit lower. About half of that are civilians. We're going to see 20 million wounded, about 10 million refugees. The world has just never seen war on this scale before. General estimates, the cost of the war is about $338 billion, which in today's money would just be an obscene amount. And about another 200,000 Americans had been injured during this war. And so, just the war comes at a very high cost. The European economy is absolutely devastated. Both the German economy for sure, but the British and the French economy as well. Russia's economy is devastated because of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk that we had talked about earlier, and they are now communist, and so their entire domestic economy is just going to start crumbling after about, well, they kind of recapitalize for a little bit, and then they recommunize, collectivize, I should say, later. But the Russian economy will start falling apart in 10, 12 years. And so everybody's just kind of in this, kind of desperate position. America, on the other hand, because our industry, we didn't do any fighting in America. Our industry is going to come out, having innovated, it's become more efficient, and we are now at the end of World War One, kind of the economic power in the world. And by the time we get to World War II, we're just running away. By the time we get to World War II, we'll produce about half of all the goods produced in the world. And so, that's a pretty strong economy. So the U.S. Is going to find itself sucked into a power vacuum in Europe because, Great Britain and France used to be the world powers, but now they're just too weak to step up. And Wilson will try to fill that vacuum, but the American people will reject that. They'll reject it because they're going to want to return to isolationism, right? That's been the major philosophy, foreign policy position of America since George Washington is don't get involved in Europe. We finally just got involved in Europe, and 100,000 Americans died and 200,000 were injured. And the American people look at that and they say, nope, we're not doing that again. We're just going to mind our business. That's the wrong decision. We know that now. Because you can't be isolated in the world anymore. Because of industrialization, all industrial countries are producing more goods than they can buy on their own. And so we need to be able to sell things overseas. And so we can't isolate. We have to interact with these other countries. And so, but the average American doesn't know that. And so they're going to reject kind of globalization and, being involved in the larger world, and they're going to want to return to isolation. Europe is, they're just battle scarred here. The Spanish flu has wrecked them, and the war has wrecked them, and they kind of believe it's the end days, and they're going to start to kind of lose faith in the West and in their futures. So that concludes our lecture for today. We have officially ended the war. We're not done with our lecture series on World War One. We still have to talk about Wilson's 14 points, the Treaty of Versailles, and the creation of the League of Nations. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and I will see you again shortly.